Helen, if I can, how long have you been working on the Armed Forces Covenant now?
So just over 2 years.
2 years.
And then previously I worked on the Armed Forces Covenant when it very first came in 2011.
Right. So when it first came in, and from that moment, we've known there was a serious challenge around bringing this in Northern Ireland because of the way legislation works. So why are we still talking now about getting someone from Northern Ireland onto the board and potentially getting someone to sit in and listen to it? Because we had this exact same conversation in 2015 and 2016. Why is there no one from Northern Ireland doing it?
I would argue, okay.
Who would you invite? There's no government for us to talk to at the moment. Who would you invite?
No, but previously in 2016 there has been, and in 2015.
The Veterans Board wasn't sitting then.
Yeah.
But you had these meetings around joined up healthcare provisions and things like that. You've had these meetings around service charities, around how the Armed Forces Covenant is implemented. You've had these since, I think, 2013 when they were first set up. So why now in 2018? I accept the point at the moment around the government, but you know that dissolved 9 months ago. Why do we still not have someone from Northern Ireland?
So we do have representatives from Northern Ireland, we have done in the past, but it's not always about presence on the board. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to make the Covenant a reality in Northern Ireland, which we might not want to publicise so much, which we've discussed before for obvious reasons. But there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes without having to put a big stamp on it because of the particular difficulties over there. But there is engagement with officials in Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Previous ministerial trips have been made over to Northern Ireland. As I've said, we've now given extra funding for Northern Ireland to build up the capacity building. So there has been a number of work strands over the years to do more.
So you're comfortable that they are properly represented and the intricacies of that challenge of bringing in Northern Ireland into
clearly,
is
there isn't
represented
an
in these
administration there
boards?
at the moment, no, in terms of political presence.
Clearly.
But at an official level and with the brigades and with the veterans charities that are out there, we have got a much better handle on that. And that has been work over a number of years to get it to this stage than we have had before. And of course, there's always more that we can do, and there's more that we're planning on doing. Setting up this new structure is going to be integral in that, as will the map of need work we're doing to look across the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, evidence-based, where is the need for veterans and what is that need. And that is all work that's coming to fruition over the next few months.
Okay.
If this is a concern of the committee specifically with Northern Ireland, could I suggest that perhaps you do a visit to 38 Brigade and see, as I did, the work that is being done not only by those who are serving and by the Brigadier himself, but also by the veterans organisations that are based there too. It's very subtle. It's on a different plane than, if I may finish, it's on a different plane than we see in other parts of the UK. But they are profoundly committed to making sure, specifically because of the troubles and so forth, that help and support is given. And I hope that will be backed up by Mr Robinson.
If I may, that's not the concern. The concern is that you get local authorities who are run by political parties who don't really believe in anything to do with the British Army, who will specifically go out of their way to not play a role in the Armed Forces Covenant. And my question to you is, and the concern is that they are, that without an official sort of welcome into the tent from London, they're going to fill in these communities. And there are communities in Northern Ireland who feel that the Armed Forces Covenant does not work for them because of their local authority. And the question is, what sort of moves, are you aware of that, and what sort of moves are you going to do to bring them into the tent?
So we need to find the better ways of subtly communicating them what support is out there and who those armed forces champions are in those local authorities without putting them in any
uncomfortable positions.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Tobias, at the start you said some of the Five Eyes communities don't have veterans ministers. Which one doesn't have a veterans minister?
I'm sorry?
The Five Eyes community that you got together to talk about veterans care.
I think
which one doesn't have a veterans minister?
The Europeans, they don't have specific.
Right.
It's
so
not in their title.
Not the Five Eyes community. They've all got veterans, either departments or ombudsmen or ministers. Haven't
yes,
they,
it's the European ones that do not have it in the title or had to look carefully at whose responsibility it was.
Yeah. On the issue of clearly you have these groups, and you have these groups where you get together and you talk about the success of the Armed Forces Covenant. Clearly we have to do that. Is there, to your mind, any other way that you think we could better assess the implementation of the Armed Forces Covenant across the country? So I know how hard you guys work on this relentlessly to try and get this message and the positive side of it across. I'm also aware, as is every MP, of the image that the Armed Forces Covenant has, and perhaps a take-up of individuals in their constituencies across the country. what can we do better? What can you do better in the department to close that gap? So whilst we may have a series of objectives that we mark off against yellow, red, green, whatever it may be, how do we get to a place where we can measure it and how it feels for the guys, you know, who are in Plymouth, who are in Leeds, who are in Liverpool, who want to use the Armed Forces Covenant? And I ask you because when the families came in, as you would have seen, they couldn't find anybody who had stood up and had, you know, used the Armed Forces Covenant and said that's why this process should change. They have when an organisation's done it and you've got people working for themselves, but I'm talking about the individual servicemen and women. So we've got to close that gap. Have you got any ideas about how we could do that?
Well, I think I've just illustrated some of the things. Firstly, you're questioning the entire model. I don't think the model itself is at fault. I think, as I said at the beginning, it's a journey that needs to be advanced. There is a cultural challenge that we face in the UK in the support that we require, now that we've made our commitment to do so, to make sure that no armed force personnel is disadvantaged. And that, I'm afraid, does actually take time. So we need further communication. We need to push forward the message through things like Armed Forces Day as well. We need to make sure the Veterans Board has got its matrix to actually hold to account Department of Local Government, NHS and so forth, to say, are you meeting and providing the support that is required, that is expected of you in these areas of responsibility? And that we are absolutely making progress on.
How are you going to hold them to account? How are you going to hold government departments to account?
I'll give you my copy of the covenant.
I've read it, don't worry. How are you going to actually hold them to account?
It shows very, very clearly where there is work to be done and where we actually need to, where we have actually made progress in making sure that facilities for providing support for mental health, for providing veterans expertise, for getting GPs to become experts, accredited experts in looking after veterans issues, specifically veterans issues, is actually moving forward. These are excellent ideas that are moving forward. Yeah. Now, if there are recommendations of specific ideas, but you're just saying, what more can you actually do? Absolutely, we want to and are open to ideas to advance this.
Okay, so would you have representation?
But a lot of this is to do with the actual message itself.
I get the message. Would you have representation from veterans groups or from leading charities to have a role on this Veterans Board so that they can say on the ground, this is what it feels like, this is what you're putting in one end of the machine, I absolutely get that, this is what it feels like on the ground, and these are the sort of detailed challenges we're coming up against. Is there any way of getting anybody outside the MOD involved in this process or other government departments so that we can't be accused of marking our own homework?
Okay. First, I think we need to explain what the Veterans Board actually does, because it doesn't try, it gives strategic direction and it provides the matrix for which the strategy is then judged. You then have the series of other committees and representations for which, on a more daily basis, we are in touch with the very people that you're talking about, including the charities. Every week we are meeting with charities to recognise and understand what more can actually be done to make sure the covenant itself is actually is met. So that is the approach that we take.
And can I say that in a couple of weeks' time I'm going up to the Veterans Reference Group, which is a group formed of veterans, whether they're wounded, injured, sick veterans, veterans that have left, usually, and also their families, to sense test some of our policies and thinking coming out so that we have a bit of a sounding board with veterans.
That's exactly what I mean.
So that's the group that I'm going to see in a couple of weeks' time in Cardiff, and I really hope that they come on board and help us shape what we're looking to do on our veterans' work. So, yeah, excited about that.
Perfect. So that is taking place.
It
Brilliant.
is. And on the independent point, you know that we have independent reports, particularly through Forces and Mind Trust. Last year on the Community Covenant, this year on the Covenant in Businesses, and we're up for continuing to do those reports with an independent body who does scrutinise and say, this is going well, this is not going so well, you need to do more here. We really welcome that.
Exactly. That's good. Right, if we can just move on to libel funding. The NEO came up with a finding that they can't confirm the charities spent their libel grants as intended. Is the department doing anything on that at the moment?
I think you want to expand a bit more why they came up with that report, or shall I do that?
Why, yes, but also what is the department doing? We've had this enormous amount of money that's been put into veterans' care. How are we going to make sure that there is something concrete at the end of that, so that in 15, 20 years' time we are in a better position with veterans' care than we were before we put all this money into the system?
Well, I think you've had the charities in front of you, and I think they push back a little bit on this very same question to question whether the monies had been poorly spent. These are going to some incredible charities that work very, very hard indeed. And I think to give the impression that somehow this money has been wasted paints a false picture as to what's going on. It is difficult and that's been expressed in the National Audit Office's report, that when you have very small charities with just a handful of people there, as how you can accurately assess whether the money is actually well spent or not. But when you look at some of the bigger charities that you've actually invited here to speak, and indeed the work that actually is being done, they themselves, through the Charities Commission and so forth, are held to account as how that money has been spent. And I would say since the LIBOR fundings has come through in 2012, that actually this has provided exceptional service, some of the best in the world, to those who have served and indeed to their families and partners.
Do you think there's an issue at all about how some of this money is being spent?
There's always going to be an issue. Whether you talk to any large sums of money given to the National Lottery, for example, or indeed to DFID, there will always be a difficulty in ensuring every single penny is well spent. And absolutely, I don't stand back and say that we should be flippant about this. We need to make sure this is value for money. This is taxpayers. Well, it's gone through the Treasury, but it's ultimately it's money that is. We have a duty to the taxpayer to make sure it's carefully spent. But we're now moving to a new process whereby the LIBOR fund itself is got a new grants and advice model panel that is providing additional scrutiny as has been recommended by the National Audit Office.
Can I be really clear about that? There are two different funds.
Yeah.
So there's the LIBOR fund, and we've changed the process around that from 2015, so it does have much more scrutiny now. And depending on the size of the bids, it can be anything from £2,000 to £3 million more. It depends on how much scrutiny then goes into how much have they spent that money along the means that they were asked to spend that money. Plus the money's not always released at once, so it will be released in stages depending on how that project is progressing. So that's happened since 2015, and then we've also had...
So it can be pulled?
So it can be pulled.
It can be pulled. If as you might imply, something is going wrong, then you can draw stumps.
And then the Covenant Fund, which was set up with much better processes from 2015 as well, that's the 10 million per annum that we've got in perpetuity. Yeah. That's staffed by a core team in Ministry of Defence, but that's made up of grant-making experts from outside, so I recruited them in as grant-making experts, and that's who we're now transferring into an independent charitable trust from the 1st of April this year, to give it much more independence, and so they can do much more exciting grant-making going forward.
Okay, and was the department doing a retrospective review of the grants since 2012? I believe that was going on,
wasn't it?
I think
that's coming out later this year. So the LIBOR side. So
one
of my team's funded by the Treasury, because Treasury are responsible for LIBOR, MED is responsible for the Armed Forces Covenant Fund. So one of those team will look at all the LIBOR funding and produce a report on what the impact has been on that LIBOR funding. And we're doing that with the Armed Forces Covenant 10 million per annum fund as well. We're, I think it's Anglia Ruskin University, who are developing a impact framework. So all those successful grant holders will have a new framework to look at the impact of their grant. So we'll be able to do that on each substantive grant, and then we'll be able to put all that together and look overall at how the Armed Forces Covenant Fund has impacted across the UK, which is really exciting work.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Can I just add, I think you touched very quickly, you touched on the size of the form that needed to be filled in. Is that where your next question is?
Yes.
Shall I
Yeah.
keep my powder dry?
The contribution to the Invictus Games, that all comes out of the LIBOR fund, doesn't it? The MOD, so it's split, the contribution is split into three, right? And the whole from between, I forget it's split into three between, is it Invictus and a couple of other contributions, but there is a contribution from the MOD, and that comes out of LIBOR funding.
It's LIBOR, not the Armed Forces Covenant Fund, so it's nothing to do with Covenant
Yes,
Fund.
but it's
it is
LIBOR
Treasury's
funding.
LIBOR, correct.
It's LIBOR
correct.
funding, isn't it?
Yes.
And it doesn't...
so is that a correct use of LIBOR funds that is supposed to be going towards all these causes that was initially outlined by George Osborne and David Cameron when this come through? Do you think that's what they sat there and thought this is what LIBOR funding should be for?
I think it's an excellent example of what LIBOR funding should be used for. It is something that is not part of the daily operational requirement of the MOD itself. It is an exceptional idea and concept that Prince Harry has promoted and pushed forward. And it's not just LIBOR funding itself. There's 3 or 4 major sponsors that are involved in this, and I think the MOD also gives some direct funding, or we allocate resources, people, to
you allocate
help
resources
support
to
it
people.
as
Is there
well.
any money at all that comes from the MOD that goes towards Invictus?
I'd have to. I attended the last one. I'd have to check on that, but it is hugely supported in a number of ways, and I could get back to you. But it's as a vehicle of what it actually does, it's absolutely exceptional.
And nobody would dispute that at all. But other countries, their departments of defence, they fund their teams and they contribute to the Invictus Games. And in this country, when the cheque is written from the MOD, we go straight to the LIBOR fund. Do you see how that may or may not be viewed by the great British public, either good or bad? Do you accept? I'm slightly concerned because I get the impression you don't think there's any issue whatsoever in the way some of this LIBOR money has been spent, or in some of the ways that your department has spent it.
I fully appreciate that, and we need to be careful as to how it is spent. But I think you need to appreciate that where is this pot of money, where this money, where it's going to come from? You're, of all people, are calling for things down in Plymouth. Where's this money going to come from?
So
Okay,
I need to
we
confirm
have to
this.
live-
with the greatest
we
respect,
have to live-
that is not an answer, because that is
we
a
have to-
central government
It is an answer. We
responsibility.
have
No,
to-
it's not.
we have to live
It is a
within our
central government responsibility to fund
To
defence.
respond when you make a point, Minister.
I'm simply saying I would love to see an increase in LIBOR funding. It's not going to continue forever. It's coming to its end. Indeed, many of the programmes that have been initiated through LIBOR funding, part of the agreement was that there would be a continuity of support, financial support, to make sure these projects just didn't curtail, or there was a finite end date itself. I think the work of Invictus Games is actually incredible. Whether there is support from the MOD, but quite rightly, there is also support from the charitable sector, and I think the taxpayer doesn't have a problem with LIBOR funds being used in this way.
Johnny, one more go.
And that's
No.
true of other countries as well, to be fair. Other
Yeah.
countries use a mixed blend of funding.
They do. They use a mixed blend, but
Yeah.
their department
So-
contributes to
and I
the
don't have the
Invictus
answer
Games,
to
and
that.
that was the
We
understanding
don't
that
have
was
the
set up
answer
on.
to that. I
We
need
don't
to
do
write
that.
to
We go into the
No,
LIBOR
I don't know
pot,
that we
and
don't
that's
do
exactly
that.
what Martin is
So I don't
talking
know that
about.
we don't do that. I don't know the answer to that, so I'd need to confirm with you how much MOD of its own budget spends on Invictus. I just don't know that.
And we then need to compare that with all the other countries that are often not actually sending teams the size of what we do, because we helped pioneer this project from the Warrior Games itself.